Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and joining me for discussion today are former Knesset member Dr. Einat Wilf and conservative activist and CEO of Hebrew City, Golan. Today we're going to be talking about the possible outbreak of war following the resignation of Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri and the 13th anniversary of Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's death. So starting with the anniversary, 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza have recently gathered in memory of the late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. At the event, PA President Mahmoud Abbas addressed the crowds with a renewed promise that Gaza will always be a part of the future Palestinian state, and that if the two-state solution should ever fail, the Palestinians will go back to a one-state ideology, i.e. that they would demand equal rights unilaterally, a promise that was first made by Arafat himself.
ياسر عرفات هذا الرجل الذي أخذ نوط العالمي للثورة الفلسطينية في العالم، بل نوط ثوار العالم كله لا زال خالدا في ذكرى حتى الأجيال القادمة. رسالتي هنا قادمة لنثبت أننا هنا لا زلنا قائمون في هذه الأرض المقدسة، أرض غزة. أرض غزة لا تقبل القسمة إلا على رجل واحد هو الذي صنع الثورة الفلسطينية ألا وهو ياسر عرفات.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the discussion with the first question as what sort of unilateral agreements can Abbas actually accomplish should these negotiations fail? Let's just jump to the worst case scenario. Dr. Wilf, we'll start with you.
There's nothing that he could accomplish. I mean, neither one of these is a threat because for the Jewish people, for the Jewish Israelis, it's very clear that becoming a minority in an Arab state means that they will not enjoy any rights, they will not enjoy any equality. The Jews have never enjoyed an equal status in any Arab state ever, and there's no reason to believe that we would be the first. And certainly the whole purpose of the Zionist dream was not to make the Jews a minority in an Arab state. So it's not anything that we're going to agree to. It's merely a tactic in what appeals right now to certain international ears. So the Palestinian tactic at the moment is to say, oh, we have agreed to the two-state solution, but look at those terrible Israelis. Because of the settlements, they destroyed the two-state solution, so we have no choice but to pursue the one-state. What they kind of conveniently neglect to mention is that they've never accepted the two-state solution, neither as Arafat, neither as Abbas. As long as they demand the right of return, it means that they have never accepted the two-state solution.
So, okay, moving on that same vein, the idea that if the two-state solution fails, isn't that sort of taking already a defeatist attitude and saying, you know, let's plan for when it fails?
It's not really planned for it when it fails. It's more as admitting that there is no such scenario, that a two-state solution will sustain without terrorists trying to kill Jews. And regarding to what Dr. Wilf has said here, I agree that there were no agreements that really could have been, achieved with Yasser Arafat. But the most important thing to remember is that Yasser Arafat, who was some sort of a puppet that was brought by our government in order to achieve... By the
Israeli government?
By the Israeli, Yitzhak Rabin, rest in peace, brought Yasser Arafat, God knows from where, in order to, try and make him some sort of a peace partner. But we have seen the results. Yasser Arafat was a terrorist and remained a terrorist when he was as the authority of the Palestinians. And what he basically did, he was a very good, marketing person. He knew how to market this whole Palestinian issue, but in actual fact, what he did was support terrorism against Israel by terror attacks and by, the Second Intifada that he was a very important part of. So we have to remember that although today there are some people who pretend and make him seem as though he was the so-called peace partner that we missed, no. He was a terrorist who basically under a very good campaign promote terrorism against Jews. So, all right, so if the promotion of killing Jews is still continuing on in Gaza, which I think nobody's contesting, how is that going to maybe change under Palestinian unity? Because the whole idea of this commemoration was really under the guise of Palestinian unity. Abbas is speaking in Gaza for the first time since 2007, etc. Is anything likely going to change in terms of terror once Fatah takes over in Gaza?
One of the myths that has been promoted in recent years was the notion that there is a moderate Fatah, a moderate Abu Mazen, and an extremist Hamas. I see it when many progressive groups that I meet, they're like, okay, we get it. Hamas is extreme. They don't recognize the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. But Fatah, Abu Mazen, they are your partners. Now, it's true that Abu Mazen has renounced generally the use of violence because for their own reasons, they realized it's not very useful. But he has not renounced the basic idea that Palestine from the river to the sea will be free, that Palestinians have a right to the entirety of what they call Palestine from the river to the sea through this mechanism of return. So at no point, it doesn't matter unity or not unity. There is no leader among the Palestinians, there wasn't and there isn't at the moment, who will truly accept partition between a Jewish state and an Arab state.
I hear a lot, among the Knesset members these days that, Abu Mazen is, mostly from the left, that Abu Mazen is some sort of a peace partner. And you hear the separation they do between Hamas and Fatah as though Hamas is more extreme. I have to say, we have no peace partner today among the Palestinians. We only have people that are playing the game, in order to get somewhere and then, blow up the entire thing. What they're trying to achieve at the moment, the only difference between Hamas and Fatah is that Hamas is clearly wants to destroy Israel and Fatah wants to make it seem to the world that they have tried, but Israel was the one who basically ruined any kind of negotiations. Israel will be under a serious danger in case of a two-state solution. And I'm saying it because the radicals today among the Palestinians are the one who control. Abu Mazen is nothing but a puppet with no strings even, because the only thing he knows has to do is to go to the UN and lie about Israel, but he doesn't have the courage to make actual development in the negotiations.
So there's two things I want to follow up now. The first is that the two major issues plaguing Gaza, regardless of one state, two state that they fight for, the first will be the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and how that will be solved. And the second, which I'll get to in a little bit. So the humanitarian crisis. Is Fatah and Hamas, are we going to see another split? Because Fatah is trying to alleviate some of these issues and the pressures, in terms of electricity, water, humanitarian aid, and medicines that have just come in for the first time in 8 months, sometime in some cases longer. But those were all originally imposed by Fatah. So are we going to see Hamas getting less and less and less out of this deal, and at some point they're going to break away? We're going to get a new organization, a new terror organization on our border?
In my opinion, any kind of new terror organization will be even worse. But I have to say something about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Two groups are getting something out of it. The one is Hamas and Fatah together, because the more pressure they put on the Gaza Strip, the more pressure they put on these people that when they suffer and have no water, no food, no electricity, the more aggravation there is from the Gaza people. And who are they projecting it to? On Israel. The lyings and the incitement against Israel. But I just have to say one thing. They do have the money. They do get the money from us, from organizations around the world, but they choose to put this money on tunnels, on terror, or on missiles.
So that brings me to my second concern,
Yes.
which is security cooperation with Fatah and with the Palestinian Authority. Israel already cooperates with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Assuming that that cooperation will eventually transfer into Gaza, very recently, Major General Yoav Mordechai came out and made a threat against Palestinian Islamic Jihad after, there was a terror tunnel attack and all this other stuff. Again, are we going to see more organizations that are going to pop up outside of the control of Fatah and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, a new entity that maybe even Hamas with, some agents that were let go from Fatah during these renegotiations will join?
That is always a possibility, and we already have the Islamic Jihad, but we also see that through the security cooperation in the West Bank with Israel, we see that through the deterrence in the Gaza Strip, we can achieve a situation where both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas maintain, at the minimum, a kind of quiet. This is not peace, it's not yet the two-state solution, but it is a form of quiet, and it seems to be, at the moment, in the interests of all sides. So should Israel, and with the help of Egypt, this unity agreement means that Egypt is taking a greater role in Gaza. If Israel and Egypt and the Palestinian Authority find a way to cooperate in order to secure quiet, I think it will be in the interest of everyone.
All right,
I just think that this quiet, which they call hudna in Arabic, is fake, because they're all using this quietness for something. Some to get more weapons, some to get newer strategy, and it's all in the end a quiet that will be against Israel.
All right, well, on that note, we'll move on to our second topic. The Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, has recently traveled to Saudi Arabia, where shortly after his arrival, he posted a video resignation. In the resignation, Hariri describes how his country's government has become the puppet of Iran and Hezbollah. Israel has since come out in support of Hariri's statements and, of course, of Saudi Arabia for allegedly sheltering him. But the fun doesn't stop there. Both the Lebanese government and Hezbollah have made public their suspicions that Hariri was forced to resign under duress and is being held against his will in Saudi Arabia. Now, the Lebanese are talking war, and Israel's been dragged in.
الرجل محتجز في السعودية وممنوع حتى هذه اللحظة من العودة إلى لبنان. نضم صوتنا إلى كل اللبنانيين وإلى ما صدر بالأمس عن الاجتماع المشترك لتيار المستقبل وكتلة المستقبل بالدعوة إلى وجوب عودة الرئيس الحريري إلى لبنان. ما تحطوا هدف القضاء على حزب الله. مهما فعلت السعودية وقامت به وقامت الدنيا وقعدتها وفتلت الكرة الأرضية وجابت عاصفة حزم ودفعت إسرائيل إلى الحرب، لا يستطيعون القضاء على حزب الله.
You just heard Haeer, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, resigning. He said basically Hezbollah took over, which means Iran took over. And I think this is a wake-up call for everyone. It says what the Middle East is really experiencing. It's experiencing the attempt of Iran to conquer the Middle East, to dominate it and subjugate it.
This is a matter of great concern to us. And what we want is for peace to be preserved in Lebanon. It is essential that no new conflict erupts in the region. It could have devastating consequences.
So Lebanon is demanding that Hariri be returned to Lebanon, or they won't even accept his resignation. They believe that it's totally false, and they want proof by him returning. What are the chances that, because we've gotten a lot of conflicting reports, so we really don't know, what are the chances, do you think, that he really did resign under duress, or versus the chances that he returns to Lebanon and they kill him?
Everything is possible in Lebanon, which is always an ongoing tragedy. In parentheses, I say the tragedy of a small minority that got too greedy and wanted too much land. But in terms of what's happening is in Syria, the situation is settling down, clearly in favor of the Assad regime and the support that it got from Iran and from Russia. Saudi Arabia, in many ways, having lost the proxy war in Syria, is now trying to make sure that it does not lose the same situation in Lebanon. Saudi Arabia had traditionally had some influence in Lebanon. It's something that it's very concerned about losing. So what we're seeing is, again, the beginnings of stirrings of proxy war in Lebanon. And I sincerely hope that just as our leadership has been actually very wise and humble to stay out of the situation in Syria and not be in favor of either side and not be part of the proxy war, that we will do the same in Lebanon. Stay out of it. We do not have a dog in this war. We have our interests to protect, but we should not be meddling in the internal affairs of Lebanon and the proxy wars in the Middle East.
So you don't think that it might spill over into Israel?
You know what? I don't, because I think we have to put aside Israel for a second and remember who is Hariri. Hariri, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, was a puppet ever since his father was, killed, murdered.
By Hezbollah.
By Hezbollah. But his father, who was actually in his heart, according to rumors, was pro-Israel, was pro-peace, was, modern days for Lebanon. Ever since then, Hariri was, trying to go in between the drops, trying to not get assassinated by Hezbollah, and trying to make peace with Saudi. Now, the real problem here is that I don't think he resigned. But I do think that Saudi...
You do think it was under duress, it was forced?
Completely.
Okay.
You know, I don't think he will resign on his free will. I do think he doesn't know who to be scared of from. I do understand Saudi Arabia by wanting to finally, you know, go against Iran and Hezbollah and this entire, you know, terror regime. But I do not think Israel will be a collateral damage here because they have so much internal issues inside. Look, we saw Hassan Nasrallah. He's an evil character who will always talk against Israel, but he is not at a point of power. Even though he has Iran backing him up, he is not in a point of power to go against Israel because he has so many enemies within. No doubt Israel should keep her eye open on this topic, but in the end of the day, I really think that we should let them, you know, organize and fix their own problems before we drag Israel inside it.
Well, you're talking about how you think for sure he made his resignation under duress. But the thing is, if we look at the interests of the parties involved, as you made clear, it makes perfect sense for why Saudi Arabia would want this resignation to happen publicly and on their land.
Listen,
but doesn't Haeer also have those same those same agendas? Doesn't he have that same thing?
Why is it a very weird situation? Because Haeer is supposed to be an ally of Saudi Arabia. He's supposed they have a common ground together against Iran. But at this point, Haeer is too scared, is too weak to actually perform against Iran as Saudi Arabia wishes. So at this point, the rumors are that they want his brother or someone else that will be fierceless against Iran. And on that dimension, you know, I think it's even more secure to hold Haeer in Saudi Arabia than let him go back into Lebanon where he can very easily get assassinated.
Do you agree or disagree?
In Lebanon, historically, every faction cannot afford to be just part of the internal politics. Every faction, every group always makes sure to have an outside power that supports them. That is part of their ability to be part of the power relations within Lebanon. So every power, whether it's the Shiites, whether it's the Christians, whether it's the Muslims, they all have to make sure that once they are perceived to be very much Lebanese, but also have the support of an outside power. The balance is problematic when suddenly the outside powers have interests that are not necessarily the interests of Lebanon. And I must say, beyond everything, I feel for the Lebanese. It's a country that lives tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and it's not clear that there's any way out for them.
All right, well, Lebanon is also arguing that by keeping Haeer in Saudi Arabia, it breaks international law, that they must allow him to return. It goes against all sorts of international conventions. And even the United States Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has come out saying the same thing, that, you know, he must be allowed to return back to Iran to resign properly. Do you agree in terms of legally speaking?
If he is indeed, we don't know. That's the thing. Part of the campaign to argue that he resigned under duress is also part of the campaign to kind of show that it's not legitimate and Saudi Arabia is part of this power play. We don't know. Yes, if he is being held hostage, yes, that would be illegal. But we don't know that.
Also, we have to admit the truth. Haeer keeps on saying that he's not held against his free will, and also the Saudi Arabians. And also, you know, some of the people of the Ministry of France went to Saudi Arabia, met with him, and came back and said he doesn't seem to be held against his will. So before we jump to conclusions, it might be to keep him safe. And you know what? The only problem in him being held there is the chaos it can cause in Lebanon. Because even Haeer supporters can feel that they are being forced to have a different kind of, you know, ruling there, and they are being taken away from their beloved prime minister. So that is the only danger. You know, Saudi Arabia should consider to make Haeer safe in Lebanon in order to resign properly, so chaos won't be like we saw in Egypt, like we see in Yemen and Iraq and many other countries where, you know, radical extremists like ISIS and like Hezbollah are taking over once a real, you know, Democrat in the Arab world is being removed.
All right, now we're talking a lot about this whole subject, but what it really boils down to is what is Iran's involvement and what are they up to in the background? And very recently, the BBC actually released satellite images that were collected by intelligence organizations that shows an Iranian military site just about 50 kilometers away from Israel, from the Golan Heights, rather. Is Israel prepared to fight a war against Iran in Syria, Hezbollah in Syria and Lebanon, a possible Lebanese army, and gosh knows who else?
We are preparing for that. Are we prepared? Hopefully, yes. But naturally, this is a situation we'd like to prevent. The idea is not to go into war, preventive or otherwise. The idea is to try to prevent us even getting to that point.
So how do we accomplish that?
With other allies. At the moment, we're not about to do it on our own. We're trying to get other allies, whether it's Russia, whether it is other countries in the Middle East that have similar interests, to make sure that they pursue it. But at the end of the day, it's not for Israel to shape the future of the modern Middle East. That's not for us to do. It is for the Arabs to do it, for the Persians, for the Shiites, for the Christians. It is up to them.
But we are a regional player.
We are a regional player,
keeping them themselves, then what are they doing in Syria?
But we are a very different kind of regional player in the sense that, first of all, we clearly have what we want. The other sides don't yet have it. I sometimes say that what's happening in the Middle East right now should be called the autumn and spring 100 years delayed. Because really what is happening now is what would have happened in the wake of the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire had the British and French not carved it up to suit their interests. So what is happening now is basically the imperial power grab that happens whenever an empire is dying. Every group tries to make sure that they get what they think is their fair share of the former empire. And that's not what we're seeing. Now, Israel shouldn't be a part of that. We have our state, we have our land, we just need to make sure that we protect it against all these forces. They are going to engage in their disputes for decades to come. It's going to be Syria, it's going to be Lebanon, it's going to be Saudi Arabia. We really just need to stay out of this.
We would love to stay out of this. The problem is that we can't. We're right in the Middle East, and the common thing that all these Arab countries have is the hatred for Israel.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's a perfect time to go into our positive word of the day, the silver lining. Anything and everything, just a sentence or two of something that you can look forward to despite all the heavy topics we just discussed. I'll start with you, Dr. Wolf.
Often people ask me these days when, how can you live in Israel seeing all the insanity around, in the Syrian border, Lebanese, in the Sinai. How do you live in Israel right now? And I say one word, denial. The key to living a very good life in Israel is that we are basically able to enjoy the beautiful life and leave the mayhem to those who are engaged in it.
I have to admit, Israel is a beautiful country, and there is a beautiful social life in Israel. And, if you're not engaged in politics, if you're not open in the news, for instance, you can live, I'm not sure it's denial, but you can live a great life without,
ignorance.
I see people go through their lives without opening the news or the radio. They know nothing about Iran, and they don't worry about it. But if I want to choose something good about, generally a good word in the end, I would choose the Me Too campaign that is running these days, because I think that now in the year of 2017, we finally, as women, have the courage to speak up. And we were talking before the show about, technicalities, what is a real sexual harassment and what isn't. And obviously, we should be very careful from this thin line where, anything is being considered, and also women can use it against men. But if we're going down to the basic, I think women that were raped and women that are really sexually harassed but in their place of work and in their homes and in their environment, and finally have the courage to speak up without being ashamed or embarrassment, I think it's a very good thing in the age of 2017.
An excellent silver lining, if I say so myself. So, all right, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today for this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Thanks again to our guests, Golan and Dr. Einat Wilf. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. See you next week, and shalom from Israel.